Hello, everyone. My name is Yana Karas, and my topic is family influences on substance abuse and alcoholism. A survey was conducted to see if the environment that a person grew up has an influence on them becoming an alcoholic or addict. Participants were asked a series of questions pertaining to their age, ethnicity, social setting they were raised in, religion, social class of their family, growing up, and alcoholic and substance abuse of them and their parents. The participants were all friends on my Facebook page, ranging from 20 to 59 and from different areas and social settings. All the participants were made aware that the survey was completely confidential and that no identifying information of the individual would be shared. Alcoholism and substance abuse are two things that have affected our society throughout the recent decades. In the 1970s, the United States was affected by heroin. Then in the 1980s was the rise of cocaine in this country. This decade was most notably remembered by Ronald Reagan's declaration on his war on drugs and First Lady Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign. Then in the 1900s, many large cities were destroyed by crack cocaine. Then in the early 2000s, the United States was greatly affected by the opioid epidemic. The one thing we know about substance abuse and alcoholism is that it is not limited to one demographic, race, gender, community, state, or country. It not only destroys individual lives, but it also destroys families. Throughout this nation's history, substance abuse has greatly affected larger cities, mostly due to large populations confined to poverty stricken neighborhoods. The recent opioid crisis that the United States has been experiencing for the past 2 decades has affected all demographics, neighborhoods, and communities. What sets it apart from other decades is that this is the first time that a drug epidemic has affected middle and upper class white American families. But does the opioid crisis mainly affect white Americans, or is that what mainstream media and publications trick us into believing? By analyzing data from death resulting overdoses in 2016, we have data that supports this claim. The data shows that out of 64,070 overdose deaths that year, 79% were Caucasian and 10 were non white Americans. Although these results would support the claim that the opioid epidemic affects mainly white Americans, one could argue that it really shows that white Americans are more likely to die for opioid use as opposed to non white Americans. To understand how the opioid epidemic came about, we must look at the history of pain management in the United States. The struggle to manage pain in patients effectively and safely has long been an issue in medicine. As high as 40% of Americans today report that they have some sort of persistent or psychological pain. Opioids are prescribed by doctors to treat physical pain and not psychological pain. When a person experiences pain, the way that they know they are experiencing the pain is because there are receptors in cells that signal to the brain that they are experiencing pain. Opioids attach themselves to these receptors and block the signals that the receptors send to the brain. Therefore, your body does not realize that it is experiencing pain. This is a good thing, but the downfall of this is that opioids do not cure pain, they just relieve you of the physical symptoms. Another huge downfall is addictive personalities that it has. Addiction represents an intemperate relationship with an activity that has adverse biological, social, or psychological consequences for the person engaging in these behaviors. A person can have an addiction to many different things, not just drugs or alcohols. The term drug abuse applies only to instances in which people take drugs purely to change their moods and in which they experience impaired behavior or social functioning because of doing so. After taking opioids for an extended period, your body begins to develop a tolerance to them, which creates a physical dependency. The other kind of dependency it can create is a psychological dependency. Since substances can have both a physical and psychological effect on a person, they are classified as a biopsychological disorder. The opioids alter your natural brain chemistry, and then your brain requires a certain level of them to maintain proper functioning. Once a person gets to a point where they are physically dependent, it is not recommended for them to stop taking them without the help of a medical professional. Opioid dependency is one form of substance abuse that does require medical detox. When a person abruptly stops taking them, the body then undergoes what is called withdrawal. Withdrawal symptoms from opioids include tremors, cold sweats, vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, and body aches. Although these symptoms are nearly unbearable, they cannot kill you. Historians and politicians do not entirely blame the mass production of opioids in the United States on opiates themselves. They attribute a second factor to being a proponent in its addictive nature. That would be the use of the hypodermic syringe to administer. This practice began during the Civil War to administer morphine to injured soldiers. There are three ways to administer opioids. When they are prescribed by a doctor, they are prescribed to be taken orally. Illegal street opioids, such as heroin, is usually not taken on the streets in this fashion. When used illegally, addicts often administer the medication by way of insufflation. Insufflation refers to snorting drugs. When a person snorts heroin, it gets into their bloodstream faster because the drug enters through the capillaries located in the nose. Since the drug enters the bloodstream faster, the individual feels the effects faster and it's stronger compared to orally taking the medication. This was discovered during its early day use during the Civil War. The most common thing that opioids were used for during the Civil War was for gunshot wounds. Doctors would often administer the medication by using a knife or flat object to pour morphine powder directly into the wound so that it would get directly into the bloodstream. The most addictive way is by way of syringe. When a person injects himself with opioids, the drug can enter directly into their bloodstream by way of their veins. Since the opioids are entering directly into the bloodstream, the person feels the effects immediately and they are a lot more intense. This is why most street addicts who abuse opioids prefer this route of administration as compared to the others. Pain management was first used in the medical field in Europe in the 1600s. The opioid doctors that used to treat their patients at that time was opium. This was very controversial. Some doctors did not feel that it was ethical to operate on their patients while they were passed out, and others argued that treating pain interfered with the healing process. As mentioned earlier, opioids were not used in the United States until the Civil War. Doctors and nurses used the medication to treat wounded soldiers. The opioids that were used at that time were opium and morphine. Morphine quickly became the preferred medication out of the two because it was about 10 times stronger than opium. It was during the Civil War and post Civil War era that opioids' addictive nature was discovered, as many soldiers that were treated with it during the war had become addicted to it. When we think of heroin today, we don't think of it as being a highly addictive street level opioid that addicts use. However, this was not always the case. The medicine company Bayer, who had discovered aspirin, also created heroin in 1898. The government continued to make regulations regarding the drug throughout the 1910s and 1920s, requiring that it only be administered with a written prescription. These researchers were convinced that heroin would make a valuable contribution to medicine as a cough suppressant to assist breathing in patients with severe lung disease. The drug didn't become an addictive street level drug as we know today until the 1950s and peaked in larger urban cities in the 1970s. The opioid epidemic as we know today is attributed to the overprescribing of narcotics and pain medications. In the 1980s, several medical professionals marketed opioids such as oxycodone and methadone as not being addictive and encouraged that they be used for long-term care of pain management in non-cancer patients. As a result, the rate of overdose deaths related to opioid use started to become prevalent in the 1900s and nearly quadrupled in the early 2000s. In order to determine if the family household contributed to drug addiction, I conducted a survey. The survey asked participants questions pertaining to the race, age, where they were born, what type of neighborhood they were raised in, religion, and social class. Those questions were then followed by a series of questions pertaining to alcohol and substance abuse history of both them and their parents. The participants were also asked to answer these questions for their parents as well. There is a copy of the survey attached. You can find it in Appendix A. The sample and method that I used was convenient sampling. I first started by making a post on one of my social media accounts asking for people to participate in my survey. There was no award offered, but the incentive was that they would be helping me in my educational career. By administering the survey electronically, I was able to avoid having to pay costs for paper, envelopes, and stamps to mail the surveys out. This was also very helpful because I have a time limit, the due date, so this allowed me to collect data much faster than traditional postage. I chose to ask people on my social media account because I have over 1,400 friends on it. They are also from different areas. My friends consist of people that I met while living in Easton, Bethlehem, Montgomery County, Bucks County, and Lancaster County. I also have many friends from when I attended Shippensburg University. Also, a good majority of my friends from Lancaster County are not originally from Lancaster County. This is the same for my friends that I met while attending Shippensburg University. I made my original post on November 9th, 2021. The post read, I'm conducting a survey for a term project I am doing in my sociology class this semester. I need participants that are willing to answer a brief survey. Your name will not be used in any data that I share. It will be 100% confidential. I will only be sharing the data that I collect, and this data will only be shared with my professor and other classmates. I would like to get at least 50 people to participate. If you are able to take the time to take the survey, I greatly appreciate it, as I would like to get a good grade for the class. Thank you. I did not have enough respondents until November 17, 2021. I was aiming for a sample size of 50 and ended up getting 61 people who responded to the survey. This process was difficult because there were several people that said they would do it and then did not complete the survey once I sent it to them. Many of them completed the survey within minutes of receiving it. The participants ranged from age 24 to 59. Of the 61 participants, 30 were Caucasian, 24 were African American, 5 were Hispanic, and 2 were Asian. Most of the participants were either Caucasian or African American, with 30 being Caucasian and 24 of them being African American. There were 5 Hispanics and 2 Asians. Most of the participants either grew up in a small city or the suburbs, with 22 growing up in a small city and 28 of them growing up in the suburbs. The religious background of the participants varied a little bit more than some of the categories, with 19 participants being raised Baptist, 18 raised as Catholic, 7 as Protestant, and 6 being raised as non denominational. There were 11 participants that were not raised in any formal religion. The social class makeup consisted of 17 participants coming from lower class family or poverty, 26 coming from a middle class family, 16 coming from an upper middle class family, and 2 coming from upper class. Of the 61 participants, 37 said that they had abused alcohol and before, and 24 said that they have not. There were 39 participants that had abused illegal drugs before and 22 that had not. Of the 39 participants that had abused substances, 31 of them answered that they had abused multiple substances. Of the remaining 8, 4 of them abused marijuana, 3 abused opioids, and 1 abused cocaine. Of the 39 participants that had abused substances, 34 of them said that they had either received counseling or treatment for it, and 5 said they had not. All 4 of the people that said they abused marijuana did not receive any treatment or counseling. The participants were then asked if their parents had abused alcohol or drugs while they were growing up in the household with them. Of the 61 participants, 22 answered yes and 39 answered no. There were 21 participants that said their parents abused substances, 28 that had answered yes, and 12 that said they didn't know. Of the 22 participants that said their parents abused substances, 7 said the substance abused was marijuana, 1 said it was opioids, 3 said it was cocaine, 1 said it was amphetamines, 3 said their parents had abused multiple substances, and 6 did not know what substances their parents had abused. The results would suggest that the family surroundings do not play a part in one becoming addicted to drugs or alcohol. There were 37 people that answered yes to abusing alcohol before. Of the 37 that answered yes, only 12 of them had parents that had abused alcohol. Of the 24 people that said they did not abuse alcohol before, 10 of them answered yes to having parents that abused alcohol. The results of this survey would suggest differently. Of the 39 people that answered yes to abusing illegal drugs before, 18 of them answered yes to having parents that had abused illegal drugs before. However, there was no evidence that suggested that there was a correlation between the substances that the individual taken the survey and their parents had used. This is most likely because the individuals might not necessarily be privy to the drug use of their parents, especially if the child themselves has never abused illegal drugs before or had an encounter with them. Often, parents don't necessarily discuss everything that they did when they were younger with their children. The topic of abusing illegal substances is a difficult topic to discuss with your children. One would imagine that this would come up if a child was having an issue regarding it. Then a parent might feel compelled to share their experiences to help their child. If an individual never struggled with illegal substances and their parents did, there would be no reason for them to broach the subject. One issue that arose with this study is that it was a survey. As mentioned previously, substance abuse and alcohol abuse are difficult subjects to talk about. It is even more difficult when you are talking about it in the family context. Some families have the idea of keeping matters of the family inside the family. Being that this research was conducted using the survey method, all the participants voluntarily participated. There may have been a good portion of people that have families affected by substances or alcohol abuse that elected to not take the survey because they were embarrassed. In the future, it might be more beneficial to gather data from a rehabilitation facility or referral agency.